deHart here. Welcome to the coaching studio. Today I have as my guest Ann Betz. She is a professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. She is also the co-founder of Be Above Leadership. She is an accomplished writer. She is an international speaker and a trainer who makes time to make sense of the intersection of neuroscience, coaching, and human transformation. Ann has written 2 books on coaching and neuroscience, the first being Integration, the Power of Being Coactive in Work and Life. It is an exploration of consciousness and the future. And her second book is The Neuroscience of the ICF Competencies. She's a published poet using her understanding of the brain and consciousness to bring life to the wonders of the human soul. Ann speaks internationally on neuroscience, leadership, and coaching, and occasionally on poetry. And she excels at making the complexities of the brain come to life with depth, humor, and simplicity. Ann resides in Santa Fe, New Mexico right now with her 4 cats. Yes, 4 highly entertaining cats. So Ann, welcome to the coaching studio. I'm so glad to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Lyssa. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So I'm curious to see where we're going to go together, and my cats may join us or fall asleep on the couch. So
yeah, well, if they're smart, they'll show up exactly as they need to.
totally.
So as I start this conversation, typically, because everybody has such a unique journey on how they arrive at coaching, and you have the added piece about the passion for neuroscience. And I guess I'm really curious about, I don't know if they're interconnected or one came first, and I would just really love to hear how you got into coaching and your passion with neuroscience.
Yeah, no, great question. No, coaching came first. I had been a coach for about 10 years when I started exploring neuroscience. So coaching came because I think somebody asked me one of those great questions. She wasn't a coach, but she asked me one of those great questions, like, what would you do if nobody paid you to do it? And this was 20 years ago, 2000, 2001. And I was feeling sort of lost professionally. And I said, I would have deeply meaningful conversations with people. Ha, ha, ha. Who's going to pay me to do that? And luckily she knew someone. So remember, this is 2001. Those were the days where you said, I'm a coach, and people said, what sport? So she knew someone who was a professional coach, and she said, there is a profession for that. And I'm like, hallelujah. I'm hooked. I'm in. I went to one class and I thought, this is what I want to do. So the neuroscience part, though, I was already a coach for about 10 years. I was a coach trainer at the time for the Coaches Training Institute, really into coaching, successful as a coach. And I'd also been interested in human awareness, or we could say human consciousness. Who are we? What makes us more or less effective? What are levels of human consciousness was my exploration, sort of, in addition to coaching. And the neuroscience was about that. So I started because my business partner, who's still my business partner, we were doing these like workshops for people on expanding our level of consciousness. And they were really wonderful, but only like 4 or 5 people would come at a time. Right. I like to say we couldn't get arrested when we were just trying to teach that. And so this was back when little like articles about the brain, now they're constant. 10 years ago, they weren't. It was just every so often you'd see some like really sort of interesting thing about neuroscience. And I said, I think this is the link. I think if we can prove what we're doing in terms of helping people move from less effective levels of consciousness to more effective levels, if we could back it up with neuroscience, we could get more people. Mm-hmm. And famously at the time, she said, you go right ahead, darling, I will not be joining you. You are not dragging me to neuroscience school. But sorry, long story short, what happened was I went at the time to something called the Neuro Leadership Institute. I then later went to study with a whole bunch of other people. But what was happening is they would be talking about the research on diminishing stress. And I'd be thinking, that's what we do in coaching. Oh, reframing, taking a different perspective, by the way, reduces cortisol in the body. What? And consistently, it'd be like every week, whatever we were talking about in class, they weren't talking about it in terms of coaching. But because I knew coaching so well, I'm going, this is why what we do works. So
Yeah.
I'd get on the phone with Ursula, my partner, and be like, you're not going to believe what I heard right now. And she would say, I think we could create a coaching tool. So that was kind of how our neuros. And then now 10 years later, she went from, you're not dragging me to neuroscience school, to being an expert in her own right. So
yeah. So she drank the Kool-Aid, the neuroscience Kool-Aid.
She said, Ann can seduce me into anything. Pretty much true.
That's hilarious. You know, and I think it's so interesting, this idea of the competencies in the neuroscience, the competencies. I really deeply believe that one of the things that makes the competencies so powerful is the container that it holds to allow brains to light up. And so I'd love to hear sort of the reflection that you gained as you're doing this dive into the neuroscience of the competencies.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about what coaching does with the brain, I mean, there's sort of the granular level, and there are some more granular things, but there's also the big picture. And, you know, in my book about the neuroscience of the competencies, what I start out by saying is, let's really just look at the big picture, because if that's all you understood, it would probably be enough. And one of the things I will sometimes tell coaches to say, if you're trying to sell into an organization, you know, or get into corporate like that, is to say, here's what I do. I do applied neuroplasticity for your people, because it sounds kind of sexy, right? And at a very fundamental level, what we're doing in coaching, especially if we do it well, and this is where the, you know, some of the more fine tuning of the competencies come in, what we are ideally doing and wanting to do. And I think about, I'm sure you have stories of this and I have stories of this, where what we're wanting for our clients is not dependency. We're wanting lasting change. We're wanting to build their competency. And the structure that coaching is created in, and the competencies help people. We believe, I don't actually have the, you know, the pre and the, you know, the past and then current
Pre-test and the post-test.
Pre-test and the post-test brain scan on this, but I believe it's really true that when you are really helping people both diminish old negative wiring, it's a metaphor, why, you know, the brain isn't really wired, but it's a good metaphor, and helping them wire in new beliefs, new attitudes, new ways of being, not just temporarily, but, you know, and not just in the one area that they maybe came to coaching for, but in all areas. So, you know, to me, that's a very, you know, undeniable thing that we do, because of our action reflection cycle that we, you know, because we help people find the meaning, which is critical. It's critical for change. I'm sure you know this. People have to, it has to be personally relevant. Right. What's the relevance? And so when we get the relevance, that's like a jumpstart to this neuroplasticity process, to not following the old wiring, which isn't what I want, and finding this new. And so every aspect that really relates to positive neuroplasticity are different things we do in coaching. So I think in some ways that's like the biggest big picture of what we do. I mean, there's a lot more.
Right. But, and, you know, and I think the thing that you're saying that I really want to anchor in here too, is that, I mean, basic Psych 101 says we believe what we tell ourselves. Yeah. Right. And so if we have a coach coming in and telling us, advising us, telling us XYZ is your way out, we don't have the opportunity to make that meaning for ourselves. And to your point, we don't have sustainable changes because we didn't embody that experience that led to that awareness. So therefore it's a glancing awareness, but it's not an integrated awareness. And I appreciate that so much.
You're making me think, well, a couple things. One is I was teaching at one point and teaching new students, brand new students in coaching. And we were talking about this, and I love this because one of my students said, oh, I want the light bulb to go off in their head.
Yes.
Right. And it's literally like if a client says to me, oh my God, I've never thought, like, oh, that's a good question. I'm like I'm almost can literally see like a neural connection is happening. We're reaching out to a new neuron to what, that's a new potential. Doesn't happen unless it fires in their brain.
Right.
And so the telling, and then I'm also thinking about, you're probably aware of Richard Boyatzis's.
Yeah, the positive attractor and the negative attractor.
Yeah.
Speak to this.
Wonderful work. And I think this is also very much a fundamental, is that we put people in a state where learning and growth and openness, we put them in a spongier state because we don't tell them what to do. And because we hold them as naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, because we create relationships of trust because of our presence. All of these are in the competencies. And what Boyatzis found, and he's a dear colleague, and I also, I'm a big fan, because he's one of the few people who's doing direct neuroscience research on coaching. Most of the rest of it is a retrofit. I have to look at the research on stress and connect it with coaching. And you can make a really compelling argument for it, but Boyatzis is really using coaching techniques and fMRI. So it's fabulous.
Yeah.
Like, I wish he would live forever, because his work is powerful. So he's finding that when we ask these open-ended questions and we don't judge and we don't diagnose and we don't assess, the brain goes into a state where learning and change is much more predictable. It's really, and this is actually something I think every human needs to know. Every parent needs to know.
Every parent needs to know.
Needs to know, right?
Every boss needs to know.
Totally.
Yeah, I really appreciate the research that he's been doing. And I think that one of the things that was really so striking to me in his work also was that both kinds of coaching, whether the coach is focused on the positive attractors or the negative attractors, the client was like, thanks, that was so useful. Only after a few weeks, the persons that they were really, the persons who were making changes and the persons who impacted that client the most were the people who were making the choice to lead them into something useful versus into telling, which triggered that judgment. And to your point, it's very hard to be in any kind of fight, flight, freeze, or freak out state and curious and creative, right? Like they kind of are different mindsets. Right. And so by judging, even if it's from an unintentional, good-hearted place, it isn't enough for the client to not notice it energetically even, right?
Right. I love what you're saying though, but people, most people, many people, but they're nice, right? And they do feel like it's good to talk about yourself. So it does feel good. So that's why I love this. This is why I really love this other layer of research, is we're really looking for brain, as best we can tell. By the way, neuroscience research is
constantly changing.
Well, and yes. And, the other thing I was going to say is it is much more clunky than one would think. We're like, oh, you think we're looking at the brain, but what we can really tell about the brain is kind of movement, flow, a little bit of oxygen, blood flow. We're pretty clunky, but it's sending us in some directions that go a layer deeper than just self-report. Like, oh, I felt so good talking to Ann, versus no, I'm in a process of change that we can measure in a different way.
Right. And I think to your point, I mean, I love what your student says. It's an insight I've had also, which is, look, it's great if my brain lights up. That's nice for me. But what's really important is when the client's brain lights up. Like that's what we're working towards in coaching, if we're doing it well. Yeah.
Yeah. And they've got to make the connection. It's got to be relevant to them. They've got, even if and I think, and back sort of to your point about stress, so stress on a continuum, where super stressed is like fight, flight, freeze, flee, freak out. but you also have just, like a little too much stress where it's just a little harder to process. And it goes on a continuum. It's not like you're either totally fine or freaking out. It's,
Right.
you know this in the middle. But even a little bit of too much stress can compromise our ability to think and understand. And so this is, to me, where the coach's presence, trust, and relationship come in. And I often feel like what's happening when my client comes in is I'm bringing them into my more stable field.
Mhm.
And then their brain can get in a place sort of coming into me, being seen and held by me in a relationship where there's respect and agreements and trust, confidentiality.
Mhm.
I'm present, all of that. They will become more coherent and more able to make those connections that they're naturally able to make and may be blocked by the stress of whatever the topic is.
Yeah.
Right? Right.
I think that's so important. And I think that it is such a subtle little thing, like the holding of the field, the holding of the space in such a way that we're not pushing them towards a particular thing because of our bias that that's the right thing to do, but rather staying in that place of inquiry with people and allowing their own natural instincts and self-awareness to show
Yeah.
up.
It's sort of the thing about naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, with some exceptions, but for the most part, there's this place, and I think about when everything's in balance, where I'm more able to access my resources. I'm more able to come up with, come to my wise self. And so part of what we're doing in coaching is helping people, through some of the techniques that we have, helping them return to this place where they have access to the best of who they are. And I think about, this was probably one of the things that first made me go, oh, okay, neuroscience and coaching 10 years ago was this really good research on stress and research on, and it's, there's a U curve of stress where you don't want to have no stress, but you don't want to have too much stress.
Right.
You want to be in kind of the sweet spot, the prime zone. But when they were sharing with us, in my neuroscience class, they were sharing with us the research-driven things that reduce stress. Here's what they are. Tell me if this doesn't sound like coaching. I mean, I think this was the big light bulb for me. First of all, name the emotion. Huh? Oh, how are you today? Really? Right? Secondly, change what you can change.
Yeah.
Let go of
control.
Control, right? Okay, so what is it that, what can we do? Is there anything you can do? The third is focus on what's important to you, what values matter to you. Future, life purpose, bigger frame. You put it in a bigger frame. Mm-hmm. Basic coaching, second class I took, values and purpose. Thirdly, reframe. All of this, by the way, the research is saying is because how they test stress for neuroscience is they check their cortisol and then they stress them out and then they check their cortisol. and their favorite way to stress people out is make them do public speaking. Because for most people, for me, I find it stimulating, but that's acquired, right. Acquired after many years of public speaking. You can't stress me out. You have to do something else. Yell at me. That'll do it. Okay. So stress them out. And then do whatever it is you're trying to test, like have them reframe, have them write about what values are important to them, have them just name how they're feeling. And then you test their cortisol again. Mm-hmm. So this is, again, it's not just self-report. Oh, I feel better because I, found a new perspective. This is biochemical. And as the cortisol goes down, that's a marker. It's not the thing itself, but it's a marker of how much other stress chemicals are in the brain generally. So your cortisol is going on. What's happening is that person is coming back to their natural, creative, resourceful, and whole self.
Right.
And this is like, it's chemistry.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to, the thing that's showing up as you're talking is I'm thinking, so much of the stress that we have is not that it isn't real, but we're not really running away from tigers anymore. So we, so much of it is existential. You don't agree with me, or we have different belief systems about something, or you took my parking spot, or whatever the thing is that we're getting stressed out about. And so it doesn't really take much in a coaching conversation. A coach can just use a tone of voice that triggers that sense of the parent coming in and you're doing it wrong, right? And that
Yes, for sure.
it's
It
like,
gets processed. I mean, this is, I think, the other thing about this, putting people in this positive emotional attractor open state. I mean, this is why what you're saying is, this is why when somebody says, hey, Lyssa, could I give you some feedback? You're just like,
it's hard not to want to tighten up, right?
Totally. I have to tell you the funniest thing. So I was talking to Richard Boyatzis. I was either interviewing him or talking. We do some stuff from time to time, usually with the ICF. And I was either interviewing him or talking to him. And he was like, oh no, when people, and I feel the same way, but I love that he said it. He's like, yeah, when people, I've just led a class, I've just done a speech, or I've led a class, and somebody's like, hey, Richard, can I give you some feedback? He says, no. He said, no, you can give me feedback in 3 days. Today I'm celebrating. I'm not in a place where I can hear your feedback.
Yeah.
And, I actually think a lot of us should do that more.
Yeah. I think setting a healthy boundary, number one, is what's showing up for me. But I think also, like, I look at like giving feedback for mentor coaching or something like that. It could be anything though. And I find that it goes a lot smoother if you ask people, what did you do really well?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, to his point, let's get them into a positive mindset where you can always ask, like, where did you struggle? And that's great too. But you don't go, let me give you some feedback. I'm going to tell you what you did wrong.
Well, right. I love this. And again, I think it's because, sort of to go back to your original point, about the parking lot versus the saber-toothed tiger, we're incredibly sensitive. We're more sensitive than we give ourselves and each other credit for. Or understanding for. And so we process so many things as a threat, because I think one of the biggest threats to us as human beings is feeling like we are not part of the core group. Because I always think about, for 95% of human history, we were tribal. We were hunter-gatherers. We had to get along with anyone. And if you got somehow, separated from the tribe, you weren't safe physically. Death. I mean, that could mean death. So I think in some part of our being and our DNA, when somebody's like, you did something wrong that isn't as good as everyone else, we process it weirdly, like a little bit like it can be such a threat. Now, you can train yourself to be better about this, and you can do things that work better. And for me, one of them, and it's just sort of, it's like really what you're saying is, you give the control back to the person. And so, what did you do well? Which I actually find people have a harder time answering that. And they want to be so hard on themselves, right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh my God, no, I screwed that up. But then what I love to ask when I'm giving someone feedback is, and then where would you point yourself? What would you do differently next time?
Yeah.
You could give them back the control. And then I always ask, these are the 3 questions. What did you do? Because I do a lot of feedback on coaching, and I need to. What did you do well? What would you do? Where would you point yourself? And what do you want from me?
Yeah.
And the third one, they almost always say, oh, I did this and I want to, and then I have to be like, no. What did you do well?
What did you do well?
No, coming back here. I told you this was going to be the hardest part. And then in the third one, 9 times out of 10, if not more, they say, I want everything. I want anything that will grow me. But at that point, they have said, totally. And they have said the words, I want this.
Yeah.
And so there's some more, I mean, sometimes I think some things can still be hard to take, but they have asked for it. And it's not like, okay, then I just lay it on, because I'm still aware of the sensitive brain, and I don't want to overload them. And usually they are doing a better job than they think anyway. But at that point, it's a request.
Right.
And their brain is processing it as, this is a request, not this is something that's coming out of nowhere. And the feeling of being out of control is the most stressful thing to humans. And the thing that brings you back, sort of fundamentally, everything I mentioned, naming it, values, controlling the environment, reframing, helps people come back to a sense of control. And that's why it diminishes the stress. So that's my trick for doing feedback. And I find it, the other thing, and I'm going on and on, sorry, but I'll say one last thing, is I would say much of the time when I ask them, what would you do differently? A fairly robust part of the time they have named the thing that I've seen.
Yeah.
And or at least some of it. And then I don't need to say it. I can just
Right.
say, yeah, good job.
Yeah,
That's
great
exactly
awareness.
right.
Great awareness. And I
Right.
think to your point also, if you do need to, if they say, yeah, give me everything, choosing consciously and wisely the one little growth edge, like we don't need to
Yeah.
flood people to your point
Yeah.
with, let me give you everything. Like there's no such thing as perfect coaching. And I think that coaches come into coaching, especially around the competencies, with this idea that I've got to do it perfect,
Oh
which
my
already
God.
sets us up in that brain set of I'm not doing it right enough.
Well, listen, I'm curious what you think about this, because you're at MCC, I'm a PCC, and there are times that I'm coaching. I just had one the other day. Oh my gosh, this is a couple of days ago, where I thought, oh, I'm so glad I'm not getting assessed on this coaching. Like people might think, I don't know if that's true for you. People might think, oh, because you've done all of this in coaching, I teach coaching, you always do it right. No, I don't. I can get derailed on things, and
Yeah.
I need to kind of stay aware and give myself feedback and like, oh yeah, let me calibrate that a little bit. And I can have off days. I can have days where, I am not as locked into presence in my mind. I've got things on my mind and I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
I'm good, but I'm not perfect. And so I
Yeah.
think sometimes coaches think, oh my gosh, I'll never be as good as Lyssa. And it's like, or Ann, like I'm not as good as me all the time.
I'm not as good as me all the time either. And I'm not as good as you all the time. And I'm not as good as anybody all the time. I think that there's a level of partnership, though, that shows up. And I think that this really speaks to the other competencies that show up in the neuroscience, right? Is that psychological safety. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot of the psychological safety that shows up in relationships is when we can also name to ourselves out loud to our clients, like, hey, my bias just got activated.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
finding myself completely lost in this conversation. Will you make
Totally.
meaning for me and help me
Totally.
understand the connections? Yeah.
Or hold on a minute. Absolutely. I mean, and I will tell you, I have a couple of clients, actually more than one. I've got a couple of clients where was hired to play dual roles. I coach a lot of coaches these days, which I really love. I love working with that level of awareness. And I have a couple of clients where I am dual coaching and mentoring, and actually this one isn't even coaching and mentoring, it's coaching and consulting. So, and she's amazing, but it's interesting because the thing where I was sort of the other day, I thought, oh my shit, I didn't listen deeply enough. I started doing consulting advice before I listened deeply enough to really understand what it was,
Yeah.
and that can be tricky. But I want to talk about that for a minute, because for me, this is the thing. I think sometimes coaches get very locked into, there's been a big conversation lately about coaching and therapy more, which I think is good. I think we need to be talking about this more, because I think a number of years ago, when we first started out 25, 30 years ago, we had much more of there's coaching and there's therapy.
Yeah. The
And
Venn diagram has gotten closer, hasn't it?
yeah, I'm much more into the Venn of it, the overlap of it. And I, was on a forum on Facebook or something, a coaching forum, and somebody was saying, oh, the minute my client starts talking about divorce, that's a therapy issue. And I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting, because I don't hold it that way at
Right.
all. I've coached a number of clients through divorce and through difficult things. So I think it's forgive me, because this might irritate someone, I'm going to say it anyway. I think that's an immature view of coaching. That when we focus on the what we're talking about, oh, there are a whole bunch of whats that we don't do in coaching: divorce, alcohol, substance abuse, depression. There's all these things that the minute they come up, they're no longer a coaching issue. And I don't think that's right. And this is based on also like a lot of really interesting coaches I've met. I think it's the how. How do we work with someone going through a divorce? I met a really cool guy at ICF Converge 2 years ago in Prague, who is a coach for people dealing with alcoholism. I wouldn't do that. I don't know enough about it. He's very precise. He's very careful. He's very clear about when he needs to work with a treatment program or with a therapist as well, at what point in the process, and how he's very clear about how he does it. But
Yeah.
he doesn't hold just because there's substance abuse, it's no longer coaching, because he says he's had it's like really amazing success in working with people.
Well, I think the thing that you're bringing up that I think is really important is that it's also on a spectrum, right? Which is, I think there are people who have done the work. Like I have my clinical licensure still. So, I mean, technically I'm still capable of being a therapist, but I don't choose to do therapy. But even when I was doing therapy, I never worked with substance abuse issues specifically, because that wasn't where my training and my intensive training was. Mine was much more around trauma and relationship work. And so that's where my focus and my expertise, if you will, was focused due to the training that I did. And so I agree with you. I mean, I think it's very much a Venn diagram that we're looking at. And there's a lot of crossover between what is an issue that can be managed and explored in coaching. I think that there are some areas that need a certain level of training to deal with. And I definitely think, like with substance abuse and trauma, that these are things that you need to have a lot of training in. But even more so, you said something that is really important, which is also, if a person is in therapy and they have a therapeutic issue and you're coming in and you're coaching them on something, what is the relationship you have with their therapist, so that there can be this kind of well-rounded coverage of the conversation, and you don't have to take on something you're not comfortable with as the coach.
Yeah. And I think that, because for me, this brings in another, when I think about some of these areas, there's not, to me, the what isn't as important as the how, and also the who.
Yeah, I think the who is
really important. And I think about a number of clients that I've had that had therapists as well. I did not have a specific relationship with the therapist, because the who of the client was they were regulated enough that they were well able to manage that themselves. And they were saying, yep. And I talked about this with my therapist, and she suggested I bring it to you. And we were in a partnership. I didn't need to have a third party relationship, because they were so, I will call it very, very regulated and very clear about what they wanted to work on with each one of us, and as well as how they fit together. So one of the things that I've started saying that people have found helpful, it's probably clear to you as well with your background, is that what I look for in terms of coaching versus therapy is the degree to which my client can return to an observer capacity in their mind.
I think that's really valuable.
And for me, it feels like a fairly bottom line. Like, to me, it's really clear. If they can be an observer, my friend of mine wrote a workbook called The Fascinated Observer. And I'm like, that's what I'm looking for. If you can be a fascinated observer of your process, or, even an observer at all, then I think we can coach. And depending on where you are in the process and your degree of regulation, you might need a therapist as well. But this idea, there are things we can't talk about. Or the other one I find hilarious is, we don't go to the past. And I still hear this. Yeah. I'm like, well, what do you do when your client comes in and they want to talk about a meeting last week? Is that in the past? Where does
I think we get a little binary sometimes on these ideas.
Where does the past actually begin?
Like in this moment, in this one, in this one, in this one.
Right. Right. I mean, of course we talk about the past. Please stop telling people you don't talk about the past. Right. How do we talk about the past? I mean, even to the sense of, when I've got a client who's in a strong observer mind, I'm thinking about a client and a couple of clients specifically in this last week or so, very strong, very regulated, very interested, and something comes up, I may ask them, what does this remind you of? Now, I'm not going to unpack everything. I'm not going to look at family dynamics and map all of that out and do many other things a therapist might do. But it is interesting to the client often to find that there is there's a connection there. There's a deep connection there that they've probably already been working on. And this is the next, I say, like the next heavy weight in the spiritual gym.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're talking about this too, I'm thinking, I really like this capacity of the client to get back to that regulated equilibrium so that they can be an observer of their life. I think that is so crucial. And I also think, one of the things, if we're really looking at coaching from the perspective of holding the container and holding the curiosity, if every question is leading, I get that. Every question leads a client someplace. And yet, if we're leading them into the situation versus into an exploration of their relationship to the situation, we're not doing them any service for sustainable changes. And it also keeps us out of therapist mode if we're not doing psychoeducation with them. So we're not here to tell them what they need to do. We're asking questions that invite them to our kind of circling back to the earlier part of this conversation, that invite them to self-awareness and self-reflection. You're not going to get in trouble as a therapist if what you're doing is inviting the client's wisdom forward. I think we're going to get into trouble if we're acting like a therapist, if we're saying, this person's crazy and I need to get them sane, and now it's my job to get them there.
Right. It's and constantly be looking at, can this person be an observer? What state, more about like, what state are they in? Less about what am I doing it right or doing it wrong? I may not be saying that very, very much, but do I have them in this open, curious, trusting, safe state? And am I resisting sort of prescribing or telling them what to do, because we've created this great relationship of trust where they are open to it, keeping the ball in their court, keeping the hands on the reins there.
I think, and the more, this is what's showing up as you're saying that, which is how do we support our clients to be in the empowered state of choice, right? And that is that place of a really good coach can really hold that conversation in such a way that the client is able to explore patterns. Of course, patterns come from the past, but then to also, like, we're not just going to go, tell me about this pattern and where did it come from, but like, I'm the noticing of the pattern and what does that tell you about this thing that you're dealing with today?
Now.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
There's the repetitive. Where are we now? What is the next, step for you? Holding it open the whole time.
Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to underline, and I do think, and I really love that you said this as a therapist, I think there is, for some coaches and maybe just people in the world, there can be this belief that therapists are trained in everything and therapists can somehow fix mental disorders, like you got the magic wand and we didn't, and that you're trained in everything. And something that I know from the work that I've been doing in the trauma, also relational trauma field, is that like most therapists are not necessarily trained deeply in relational trauma, in trauma.
Right.
It's a specialty. We can't assume that, just as, substance abuse is a place where some people focus their learning. So I think there are some of these areas where we need to tread carefully. But just like you wouldn't necessarily decide to be an equine coach without getting trained in equine assisted coaching, which is a subset and a thing, and there are things that you do, and how do you wouldn't do that if you didn't know anything about horses. You wouldn't just be like, I'm going to go work with a horse. Like, yeah, and
you wouldn't go to a cardiologist, best cardiologist in the world for a foot disorder, right? Like, it's just not what you're going to do.
Totally. And so I think there are some of these crossover things where, like substance abuse, like trauma, like relational trauma, where there's going to be people where it's not appropriate for us to work with them because of the stage that they're at or their state of being. And then there's going to be people where we may be a helpful part of the team. And then there's going to be people where often when they're further along in their process and maybe they've done some of the other things, I have a couple clients like this in my practice right now. We are fascinated observers of the past relational trauma, and we are still weaving meaning, and it is powerful, but they've done a lot of therapy already.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely helpful. It's helping them see sort of the residue of it. But the only reason I'm doing that is I'm trained in relational trauma.
Yeah, I think these specialities are really important. And I don't think that speciality is enough. I really think that the coach training itself also to learn the mindset of inquiry over advising. And so between the two, you've got the foundation of inquiry and you add to it the speciality. And let go of this idea you have to be everything to everyone. I mean, therapists aren't either.
Right. That's sort of, that's what I was trying to say is don't assume a therapist, somebody actually, this just came up where someone on one of my Facebook groups was talking about, I'm dealing with this client. I'm really concerned about what she's saying about her husband. This sounds like abuse, and people were weighing in. And I was saying, yes, get thee to a therapist, but be sure the therapist has a background in relational trauma because they don't all. Yeah. And somebody took me on and said, we can't be telling our clients that. And, I'm like, yes, you can. Like, please, it can be harmful if this person doesn't have this background. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of interesting. One of the things you're making me think of, Lyssa, this would be a really good difference in the coaching profession. I don't think we're there yet, but I'd like to, maybe some coaching schools, not the one I trained for. So the view was, you're a coach. You can coach anybody, which I think, ask your powerful questions, hold your space. I have literally coached a guy who worked in the salt mines. I coached a guy who, like bred shrimp. I mean, I have coached the craziest people from, actually it was one particular gig that I had for a while. So yeah, I can coach people without knowing their background. So there's a truth to that with my skill set. But the coaching schools aren't dealing with it like med school or even therapy, where it's saying you have the basic training. Do you want to be a generalist?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you want to be a specialist? If you want to be a specialist, where can you get that training?
Yeah.
Maybe you do want to specialize in coaching teens. Okay. There's some legal, ethical, and strategic things you probably need to know that you didn't learn in your basic training.
Right.
Eating disorders.
Right.
Somebody I went through training school with works with eating disorders. She went and got specialized training.
Yeah. And I think that's really crucial. I think it's really crucial that we don't ever stop growing. And if we have a passion for something, just because I was born into a traumatic family doesn't mean that I'm an expert in holding trauma as a way in my coaching. There's really specific things. And in fact, having come from a traumatic background may actually put you in a bad place for doing that kind of work, unless you've done enough of your own personal work also. Right.
And you've unpacked it and kind of what's right.
Yeah. Like we have to do our own work, right? So that we can show up fully with our clients and not layer our stuff onto their stuff. So, Ann, this has been so much fun. And I really want to just sort of, before, as we're coming to a close here, what are you up to that you'd love people to know about?
It's a great question. I mean, usually a lot. So the two big things is we've got classes starting in October, and we do a fundamentals of neuroscience. We do a year-long neuroscience consciousness and transformational coaching is what it's called. We bring in the 3 threads of human effectiveness, really good cutting edge. This is no neural myth. There's no neuro myths. We look at the current research on everything. This isn't like top line. This is deep stuff where we're really looking at what's going on. I love that. And then what are the coaching tools? So it's not enough that we have this sort of idea about stress. For example, what are some ways you can coach a client around that? So it's a year-long program, and I think there's 25 new coaching tools, and they're not coaching tools that I've seen anywhere else. So we do that. And then also in October, we're starting we have a current module going, our very first module of relational trauma and coaching, speaking of specialization, looking at it very carefully. And we'll be starting our second cohort of that. So if that is interesting to people as a specialty, we're very careful about the how and the who and the when that we work with folks where relational trauma is part of what's going on. Yeah. So that's been really exciting. And I'm looking forward to we're in the middle of the pilot right now. It's going really well. So
that is very exciting. Well, I'll definitely have links below. And thank you so much for the conversation today. It's anytime we can talk about the mind, I'm a happy camper. So it's really wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the coaching studio.
Totally enjoyed it.